Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.
Eric Braeden for you. Great. Okay, here you go.
Hello, Will.
Eric,
Where are you?
how are you?
Where are you?
I'm in New Jersey.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Well, call it to New York City, right? Then that way you can play me better. So
You're older than a Richard Pitt, or what?
it really is. Absolutely. 28, I think. Mhm.
Oh, my God.
Crazy. And I heard about you guys with the flooding right in L.A.
Yeah, well, you know, they make a big drama out of it, but there's something because they are very remiss in California
Yeah.
about dealing with hillsides.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you go to Europe, go to the old wine countries, which is very steep hillsides, and they've been there for centuries, and they terrace them, they stagger them.
Right.
The same thing in the rice paddies in the Orient.
Yeah.
You think any of these morons here would think of that? No. Hillsides keep on coming down. Developers just build, and then hillsides come down. They wonder why.
Right.
So simple to solve.
Yeah, you have to go talk to Arnold, right?
Are you kidding me? Do you think Arnold's interested in anything about Arnold? Give me a break.
Well said. I'm very glad. I'm very appreciative of you giving me this interview. I thank you.
Any question you want to ask?
Okay, great. I just have a couple political questions, then a lot of focus on The Man Who Came Back, and then a couple from some older movies or some
Right.
other stuff. Great. Basically, sort of focus a bit on Gaza. A lot of been sort of critical that maybe the peace process begun at Annapolis last year was sort of flawed or like a wasted opportunity. They didn't really realistically address Gaza. Do you have any feeling?
Look, that whole Middle Eastern situation is so complicated.
Yeah.
There has to be. There's been no real leadership, certainly not under this administration,
Yes.
to urge people to come to some peaceful conclusion. It's extraordinarily difficult. The dilemma is the following. Very simple. The Jewish people have undergone the most traumatic experience that you can undergo as an ethnic group during the Second World War, the Holocaust. Okay. To rebound from that within a larger society of people who are not of Jewish faith is extraordinarily difficult. There's always a sense of paranoia. I understand Jews who feel that way, that they want their own country, a Jewish state. The mistake perhaps that was made initially is that Israel should have perhaps been a secular state. But I understand Jews that after the experience, after the Holocaust, after that extraordinary, deeply felt experience, that they wanted a country of their own. So, Palestinians were displaced. They're angry that they were displaced. Both emotions are justified. Both sides have justifiable, visceral feelings about it. So how do you bridge that gap? How do you bridge that, that a priori conflict, emotional conflict? It's so deeply felt. Jews feel that they were, deeply hurt. I mean, it's the anguish must be incomparable, and yet Palestinians feel that they were, because it's essentially a European problem. The Holocaust was a European problem, and specifically German. The Palestinians obviously feel that problem was then transferred onto that area, and they had nothing to do with it.
Right.
Think about it.
Yeah. It's
It had nothing to do with it. In other words, the inhumanity to man that was exercised in Europe and Germany particularly during the Second World War was now visited upon people who had essentially nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
So, are they pissed off? Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Are Jews very, very fearful of living, having a country that is secular in nature, where perhaps people of other faiths could eventually constitute the majority? Of course they are. I understand that. So, these issues need to be addressed openly at a table, and you need to get back to basic Israel is frightened of the fact that if there's a right of return by the Palestinians, they would eventually constitute the majority.
In fact, it's so interesting. About 10 minutes before you called, there's a new book out. It looks excellent. A guy goes around the world and he gauges happiness, in each of, I think 50 countries. And he said that basically Denmark and the more sort of like racially, the same nations are usually quote unquote happier because their cultural roots and their language are the same. And he's not trying to say that a diverse country like United States or other countries can't be happy, but it just is kind of easier, because they're the same.
Yes, it is. Yeah. On the other hand, there's also an enormous amount of boredom in this country.
I was going to say diversity.
And high rates of suicide. So, give me a break.
I thought of Japan. It's immediately there's such a high rate of suicide in Japan. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Denmark as well. All the northern countries.
You didn't really speak much of that, Eric. Very true. But
so it's.
But it's interesting. I thought, well. Yeah.
I mean, you could perhaps. I don't know. It's an enormously difficult situation.
Yeah.
And but yet we need to address those problems.
Yeah.
And we need to, I guess, look, who the hell am I sitting outside here and saying anything about it?
But I know you've been to the Middle East many times.
Yes, well, what we must hear here in America is not only the conservative side. We must not only hear the views of the right wing of the Likud.
Mm-hmm.
We must hear the liberal Israeli side. Should have heard that for a long time.
Yeah.
So now, do I think that the Arab nations are using that as a cheap excuse to justify the status quo and to justify the perpetuation of the status quo by constantly pointing to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict? I mean, essentially, what the hell does Syria have to do with the Israeli-Palestinian? Nothing.
Yeah.
Well, what do the other Arab countries have to do? Nothing.
Right. They always bring that up. Yeah.
Bullshit.
Yeah.
So, in order to justify their inadequacies and their shortcomings and their less than democratic systems, they always point to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
Something that
excuses everything.
Right, like it's so intractable and it's so and then it's...
What the hell does Iraq have to do with Israel?
Exactly. Right.
What does Iran have to do with Israel? Nothing. It's bullshit.
Yeah.
So, in order to justify their own inadequacies and rationalize them away, they point to that. Oh, well, that means my ass. It's BS.
Yeah.
So, having said that, I had a discussion with Shimon Peres, I remember, whenever I was there last, and one of the most interesting men I've ever met. And I said, think of Germany and France. Two countries that unleashed the most cataclysmic wars man has ever seen.
Yeah.
First and Second World War. Bloodletting of those two wars compares with nothing that came before or after. So, and yet now they are the cornerstone of the European Union.
And unification with Germany, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So wouldn't it be, he says, I know what you're getting at. He says, yes, I also envision a common market in this area. Wouldn't it be wonderful if it included Turkey and Syria and Lebanon and Israel and Jordan and Egypt in a giant common market area? Imagine that. They all live, side by side. I personally think, as in a bad marriage, you need to separate the antagonists. And I have always thought that you needed to really draw a hermetically sealed line between Israel and Palestine. Hermetically sealed off by, among others, international troops under the auspices of the UN, led by American European troops. You hermetically seal them off from each other for about a period of 10, 15 years to calm things down. You at the same time support the existence of an Israeli state, the Palestinian state. You disarm them. In return, you help them economically, and they become economically viable and hopefully become a democracy. But there needs to be goodwill on all sides. But you hermetically seal them off for a period of 10, 15 years.
So there's that.
I was there at the King David Hotel, Jerusalem, and a bomb went off about 300 yards away.
Oh, wow.
And a bus blew up. Well, I went to the hospital afterwards to, see some of the patients and all that, some of the victims, and it fills you with such anger that you want to get into your tank and go over there and shoot up everything.
Sure.
That's a visceral reaction.
Yeah.
Then in turn, you do that, and then in turn, obviously, they feel a visceral anger, and they come back.
Mm-hmm.
You understand?
Mm-hmm. Just like 9/11, right? After 9/11, everyone was
that vicious cycle needs to be broken. And I think it needs to be broken by the international community.
Yeah.
I mean it.
Yeah. But sure, can the United States just do it all now? Of course.
Not alone.
Yeah.
Not alone. Not alone. You now go to the Europeans and to the Germans and say, guys, you're largely responsible for having created this conflict in the first place. Because it is the Holocaust that, as far as I'm concerned, resulted in the understandable fear of Jews to live only amongst themselves. I understand that. Totally understand. So, in other words, the Europeans and America should, as far as I'm concerned, I don't know how you do it, but I think with military units, you keep them separate from each other.
Yeah, and that's why, like we're saying, the critics are saying that Bush and his administration was so kind of late and lackluster.
That's all.
I know. Come on, the last year of his administration, give me a break. I mean, it's crazy.
It's a joke.
It's a horse and pony.
It's not even worth talking about.
Yeah, true. Right.
So this is a tough issue. A tough issue, because when you really pull back, you say, I understand what I do not understand, obviously.
Yeah.
I do not and will never understand is, and this is what makes it so extremely difficult, and this is where Arabs really have to look at themselves and say, how can we possibly support them? These terrorist organizations that make this all so much more difficult. I mean, have you ever heard of Martin Luther King? Have you ever heard of Gandhi? How about trying that route? You know what I'm saying?
It's so much more powerful. Like they say, silence and civil disobedience is worth 1,000 bombs. Exactly.
I mean, my God Almighty.
Yeah.
It's. Do I understand the visceral fear of Israelis that this, they may come and blow themselves up? Sure, I understand that. You kidding me? Of course.
But like you said, when you were there looking at that bus, that feeling, that visceral angle has to sort of be contained and restrained.
Of course it does.
Exactly. Very well said. Very well said. Okay, a little bit about Germany and their policy on Scientology. I just wanted to, the German historian Guido Knopp just compare Tom Cruise's speech to Nazi propaganda like Goebbels. Do you think it's like a little too severe? Do you think Cruise is getting being the fall man? Or...
To be honest with you, I cannot take Tom Cruise seriously. I mean, what do I care what he says?
Not many can at this point, Eric. I
couldn't care. Whatever he says, I couldn't care. Don't talk to me about religion. I have a difficulty with it.
Okay.
Just remember that whatever this Hubbard guy is, whoever started this, group of nuts, whatever, said if you want to make money, start a religion in America.
Yeah, exactly. You don't have to worry about taxes or anything. Exactly.
What do I care about the utterances of
Okay, and then how about just like Germany and America in general? I mean, obviously, the relations are good, but do you think they could be better? Or is there problems that you see?
Sure, there are problems. Yeah. In other words, there are no problems right now because we have, as far as I'm concerned, and I would be chastised for speaking openly, but I couldn't care less. I'm a free citizen. This Chancellor, Merkel, I think is very good, very pragmatic, very reasonable. Okay, where do I start with this? Let's put it this way. Germany owes America a great, great debt. Okay? America was greatly responsible for the defeat of the Nazis. America was there to support a nascent German democracy. It was there to protect Germany during the Cold War. And don't ever delude yourself and think that there was no threat during the Cold War. The plans were in the drawers, trust me, to come over and take over Western Europe. No question about that. So America helped do that. It created NATO. Germany owes America the Marshall Plan. It owes it the Berlin Airlift, and it owes it the reunification. Because neither France nor England, neither Mitterrand nor Thatcher were willing to acquiesce to the prospect of reunification of the two Germanies. They did not want it. Bush Sr. wanted it.
Mm.
He is the one who pushed it through. Don't ever forget that. And whatever you think about Ronald Reagan,
I was just going to go ahead.
Whatever you think about Ronald Reagan, I disagree with his whole supply side economics BS. But when it comes to foreign policy, really think about it. I gave a speech for Gorbachev once, and I sat with him afterwards. We talked for a long time. Ronald Reagan's actions during the Cold War in regard to the Soviet Union, his relationship with Gorbachev, his willingness to initiate a rapprochement with Gorbachev, and vice versa, by the way. History one day will look at these two figures as arguably the two most important figures in the second half of the 20th century. Think about it very carefully. Without you, do you know how close we were to mutual destruction?
It's mind-blowing sometimes.
We were so close. It's absolutely unbelievable. We were so close to it. People forget. This is due to the initiative of Ronald Reagan, Nancy Reagan, whoever was with him, and Gorbachev and his wife. Don't ever think that wives aren't important in these kind of things. They whisper sweet things into your ear, and they encourage you to do that, and I think Nancy Reagan probably had more to do with it than we realize. So, this is so important. We were so close to mad, mutually assured destruction. We were so close to it. We don't realize it. And I will forever be grateful to Ronald Reagan, if for no other reason, but for that reason, that he prevented that, and he made it possible that eventually there was a peaceful dissolution of the Soviet Empire.
Yeah, look, the other day, Obama, he said, the way Reagan could marshal people, and obviously Obama's a Democrat, but yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but that I don't want to that I don't even want to talk about, because I think that's partly BS.
Yeah,
I think it's
interesting politics, of course.
But it's of course that's all BS as far as I'm concerned. But think practically of his. In other words, there was a willingness to sit down with what was considered the arch enemy. And sit down and say, okay, let's talk. I mean, it's just extraordinary. And then, of course, he was surrounded by very wise people like James Baker and Scowcroft and those people. And but primarily James Baker. Then Schultz. Schultz was very smart man. So anyway, I don't know how we got onto that subject, but it's.
No, but it does apply too. Like the idea, like you said, unification. Yeah, I mean, that Reagan did it.
So Germany has to, now we're getting back to the subject matter. Germany has to thank America for many, many things. Conversely, America has to give thanks to German immigrants who have come to this country from 1680 on, and they constitute the largest ethnic group in America.
I'm half German, next thing, yeah.
That is denied because of both world wars. But according to the latest census, it is true. Largest ethnic group in America, meaning the contributions of German immigrants to this country have been extraordinary. Extraordinary. In every imaginable field. So there has been a mutual, a cross-fertilization, if you will. Basically, Germans trust Americans, have always liked Americans. I grew up with Louis Armstrong and Elvis Presley and all that stuff when I was a little kid in Germany. We liked GIs. In other words, there was never a hostile feeling towards America, ever. It didn't exist. Where it did exist was in the left, extreme left in Germany, who were obviously, many of them primarily now, were raised in East Germany, where they were fed in their mother's milk anti-American slogans, as the West was fed the same thing about Russia. So what I never forgave Schröder for, the former chancellor, is to tap into that latent anti-Americanism in East Germany to win the election. What I never forgave him for is not to come to New York, to ground zero, immediately after 9/11, to simply express the deeply felt feeling of solidarity with America. You understand?
Right. That
I never forgave that guy for, ever. And it was, as far as I'm concerned, outrageous. So, if he disagreed with Bush's policy, and who didn't, that's one thing. But that doesn't mean that you, in that moment of a traumatic experience, you don't come here and say, here we are, I am the German Chancellor, I express solidarity with Mama. Do you understand?
Right, we feel your pain.
Symbolically, you just show up. You don't have to say a damn thing. Right. And that I'm angry about, very angry about, in regard to that administration.
Okay. How about a little about the man who came back? I mean,
conversely, excuse me, the morons who call French fries Liberty fries in American Congress, morons don't understand that it took French financial support to win the revolution against England. Give me a break.
Right. I mean,
please read American history.
You read my mind about the Liberty fries.
Give me a break. No, but I mean the fact remains that the royal court in France dug deep into its finances, obviously for self-serving purposes. They want to defeat the Brits, but they helped the American Revolution against the Brits. Yeah. Give me a break. Yeah. This is ridiculous to have such short memory.
What what is it? Sarkozy? How do you have good feelings of him?
Sarkozy, if he is able to go against deeply entrenched bureaucracies in France, good luck to it. But he needs to do it.
Yeah.
You know, France holds on to its traditions and its institutions, and it needs to obviously, as all of Western Europe has to, get used to the fact that it ain't as cushy anymore as it used to be.
Yeah.
You know, where pensions are guaranteed and all that stuff. You got to be careful with that.
Yeah.
You know, times have changed, and Margaret Thatcher did it in England. I wasn't particularly fond of her, but she did it in England.
Yeah.
And Sarkozy, I don't know if he'll be able to do it in France, but he's a forward-looking, modern guy, and you know, in other words, look, I loathe Americans who are Europhobic, and I loathe Europeans who are Americophobic. You understand?
Right.
We have such common history, for heaven's sake. Give me a break.
You know, I talked to some of my British friends, and they're like, we just think of you as, you know, guys we just said goodbye to a couple of 100 years ago. You know, they're very fond of us. And
of course.
Yeah, great.
You know, and it's some morons over here who fuel the fires of you know, xenophobia.
Yeah.
This is ridiculous. Who are we in America? Dear fellow immigrants, give me a break.
Right, the melting pot. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. So about the man who came back, I had seen you on Tavis Smiley. I actually, sadly, I caught the end of it, but maybe it's good because that's what prompted me to contact Charles to get your interview. And it just looks wonderful. I was wondering, I mean, you know, basics aside, what really attracted you to, you know, to the material of the story?
It was initially a revenge picture, and I think that's a deeply felt sentiment in a lot of people, is revenge. Right. Revenge against people, or avenging an injustice. And I think that's a deeply felt human. So I was initially attracted to the story for that reason, but then I wanted an historic context. You know, there's an interesting book called Without Sanctuary. I don't know if have you read it?
No, but it sounds interesting.
Go get it. Go get it.
Yeah.
And you can talk to me about it later.
Awesome. I'll make a deal there.
It's called Without Sanctuary.
Cool.
And it came out about 3-4 years ago. It's a photographic photo essay, documentary photos of the latter part of the 19th century in America and early part of the 20th. And then we came upon, in our research, then Pitre, Pitre, Petrie. He's a Kate in the film. Louisiana, obviously, went to Harvard, and he wrote the script, he directed the film, and he and his research came upon and called me very excitedly that he had heard of the second bloodiest labor strike in American labor history that occurred in 1887 in Thibodaux, Louisiana. And I said, incorporate that into the script. Now we have a script. Wow. Because I just didn't want just a revenge story. I want a story content.
So you truly influenced the story that Doc story.
You bet.
Yeah.
You bet.
And that it dovetails exactly into my next question, because from the synopsis, because I asked Charles.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.